Happy to be here. Hello, everyone from sunny Michigan. And I'm excited to share with you today about our topic about ancestors and the resources that we might find about them. And I'm looking because I had the slide deck up and now it's a question of where did it go? So now I've got it coming up. So we'll get started. Hang on while I get that shared. And thanks to Kate and the Allen County Public Library, I am so thrilled to be able to be with you and to have the opportunity to share about this presentation. There are a couple of things that will come up in your in the chat, some links to some items that I'm hoping that you'll utilize. So let's get started. So I obviously welcome. And if you didn't see the information about, this is sort of a test run. This is a presentation developed by me because of just literally decades of genealogical research and all of the interesting things that have happened over those years. Over that time, since I was 12 years old, at least, when I first started in genealogy, it was one of those situations where I actually was experiencing some things that I couldn't understand. And it was initially based on a school project, and took it home to my family and asked for some help. However, over the years, a lot of these experiences really changed me and my research and how I approach genealogy. So my focus in this session is to offer content beyond the usual genealogy step-by-step processes and offering for your consideration areas of connection and support that I hope will enhance your ability to find ancestral information. First, a huge thank you and appreciation to Henry Z. or Hank Jones, Jr., FASG, for his time in talking with me about his marvelous books, Psychic Roots, in 2 volumes. I hope he was able to log in today so that his experience and knowledge could help me further, hopefully in a follow-up phone call. Thank you especially, like I said, to the Allen County Public Library for helping to host me today, and especially to Elizabeth Hodges, who I talked to on a visit to the library in December and who offered me her support, some resources that I'll talk about later, and this time. And this is the first time I'm offering this presentation. So of course, Kate and all of the staff at the Allen County Public Library's Genealogy Department will be providing you with a link to a feedback survey tool, a Google document that I'm using to ask you to tell me what you liked, what you didn't like, what wasn't clear, what needs more explanation, and more. So watch for that link. And I'm really hoping that you will give me that kind of feedback. I welcome feedback also, or other than that feedback form. If you would prefer sending me an email, that's fine too. But definitely, I'd like your feedback in writing. I'm hoping that a lot of you will respond, and I don't want to miss anything. I want to ensure you that I don't want to also miss anything in what we're doing here, live and verbally. So thank you to the library. We're recording it so that I can hear it over again and catch any of your words in the Q&A time that we'll do at the end. So if you're willing to be in touch with me to follow up, please do. The Allen County staff is also going to be sharing my very long, and I'm sorry, handout. I didn't want to omit anything, and this is the result of all these years of research I've been doing, and there's more, but it likely needs to be shortened to a more reasonable size. So some of that is needing your feedback as well. So if you can give me some feedback on that, you know, what items you think I should retain, what ones you think can go away, that's fine with me too, because I want to create a bibliography that's thorough with not being overwhelming. And then finally, on a technology note, I did a little bit of playing. All these images that you're going to see on the slide, all of the, you know, sort of pictures, if you will, that are clearly not photographs were developed using ChatGPT 4.0. So with that, let's begin. So my objectives for the session, like I said, is first in offering this as a practice or a beta session, if you will. I am hoping to get it refined for a 1-hour session. Because that's typically the way that societies and conference want our topics presented, I'm trying to make sure I can do it within an hour. And doing it just at home, talking to myself in front of a mirror, isn't a good judge of that. However, I'm also hoping that at some point I'll be given a chance in some venues or settings to offer this as a hands-on 2-hour or longer workshop, because there are techniques and practices that we could do in pairing together in table groups, other experiential content that can't fit into an hour format. So what I'm presenting to you in this hour is just a tip of the iceberg of what I have on this topic and what I would like to be able to offer to people. So help me with giving me feedback about what you think I can expand on in an hour or what I need to shorten. And then the other objectives, I hope, speak to the things that I hope brings you to this session today. All of you have either been invited by me or found this through the Allen County Public Library's website, and I'm grateful that you've given me some time today. So I'd welcome conversations with you to explore what you've discovered or what you think I've missed. This is a poem that I found quite some years ago that was actually written in 1943, and I'm not old enough to have seen it from that time frame, but certainly I think I first found it somewhere in the 1980s. So this is a poem that is very much longer, and I do encourage you to Google Della M. Cummings' name because it comes up pretty readily, and you can get access to the full poem. And Della wrote about this from her own experience of being a genealogist and being a storyteller in her family. I hope that it speaks to you of what it means to go looking for our ancestors, to put life into the cold facts of what their birth, marriage, and death dates were, to tell the stories behind what they came here to do, what they did, and how they brought us into existence. Without them, we aren't. So hopefully you're into telling their story. I'm giving you a minute to read this because it's wonderful. And I can share this slide with you later, but you can get the whole poem by Googling her name. So, how it all got started. I started at the age of 12. These books came out much later than that. So the blue book was the first, and then the green one was the second. It obviously, if you've seen these books or you've read them, and I know that they're all over the United States in a variety of places, and you can still obtain them through online sources, but they let me know that I wasn't alone with what I'd been experiencing from the time I started at the age of 12. Hank has given lots of, information in these books, and he's told me personally that he has enough additional material, stories from genealogists all over the world, that he could create at least 2 more of these books. And these books came out when I had begun also my journey as a scientist. I have my first degree in medical technology and microbiology, and later got degrees in counseling psychology and human resources and training. So a combination of all of those with these books and the processes that I'm going to share with you will explain some of what I've been going through and others in the weirdness of, shall we say, synchronicity, or the feelings of awe that we feel when we find something unique, or the inspiration that led us forward. So I want to say a special thank you to Hank for him giving me an impetus to the next steps. So, basic content, what is genealogy? So for most of us that are here on this site, we know what genealogy is in a broad-based sense, and certainly on our own work, on our own families, finding our ancestors and all of that. I want to make the point, certainly, if anybody here is sort of more on the beginner level, to say that the word genealogy or family history research or ancestral research all kind of mean the same thing broadly. There are some people that are pretty specific about how that's used, but broadly, that's how I use it. And it's all about researching our families and, the facts of their lives, but the stories of their lives especially. So that's a little opening to the door that we're going to walk through. So who are our ancestors? So for many of us with biracial, in my case, or multiracial families, our research takes in our blood or genetic families, but also what we call the families of love. Those people who adopted us or families that have supported us over many years through a variety of ways. And then more broadly, the communities and the cultural heritage that we've learned and grown from. All of this is the research that we can use to see how our personalities, our medical histories, legacies, and the connection to the broader family of the world is developed. It's very important to think about it in a broader context. So strategies for success that we often talk about, certainly to beginners in this work, but also to remind ourselves that you have to start with the closest generations. And generally, we should start with ourselves and document what we know for sure, and then moving back in time through our parents, our grandparents, and on, and especially not skipping what are often called by some the sidelines, or the in-laws, the people that we marry, families we marry into, but then also the siblings of our parents, our grandparents, and beyond, because sometimes those are where the hints are that will drive us backward further. For those of us who are female, our ancestors who were female often weren't as well documented as the males. So using that technique of broadly looking at siblings, the in-laws, the relatives, will help us to move backward in time, and especially to help us find these women. So where do we begin? The paper trail is immensely important. And in the pictures here, you can see an online family tree, which many of us currently do, but there are certainly options also, as I started at the age of 12 with paper genealogy trees and writing things in with my own hand. And I learned rather quickly to write in pencil because I got things wrong. But then we move into hopefully oral histories. What have you heard sitting around the dinner table? What have you heard during various holidays? So the oral histories of our people. Part of my family is Native, and there's lots of oral histories that are spoken only generally in the winter as part of our culture, to share stories of our ancestors, the history of our group, where we moved from, and to all of that. But then fairly quickly, we get into the paper. We get into the birth, marriage, and death records. We get into census records and all of the information that can be found in our homes, in trunks or attics, or the fancy dish that appears in the china cabinet that you have to ask your grandma where that came from and how does it tie in, but also records that are more personal, like diaries or letters, and then the more official things like censuses, voting and tax records, land records, and then, of course, the very fundamental birth, marriage, and death records, and more. Specific records that address content of ethnic groups or various language groups, and the influence of faith communities that give us a context of who we are in the world, what our values are, and what our heritage celebrates over time, whether it's holidays or particular ancestral victories in history. And then, of course, we can move into DNA testing, which opens up even more to us. For some of us, we find surprises about ancestors that we didn't know we had because the DNA tells us that the paper trail lied to us. And then, of course, more educational opportunities beyond the paper research, courses like this and other things at the Allen County Public Library and all across the United States, Canada, and the world that we can tie into, thankfully now, remotely via Zoom, but certainly going to conferences, attending Genealogical Society meetings and more that give us far more information. But of course, there's surprises, and then the DNA gives us links to cousins, which can take us down many, many more roads. And then I'm noting that there are ethnic group records. So certainly from my standpoint, Indigenous and tribal records, but records like that exist for populations all across the world. So it's always important to think about those. And then, of course, there's what we call the GPS, the Genealogical Proof Standard, which is about speaking to the specifics of how do we do genealogical research that is based in fact and doesn't go off on tangents into areas that just don't make any sense. So the Genealogical Proof Standard, in short, is these 5 items on the screen. Just briefly to what they each mean, the reasonably exhaustive research helps us to not make assumptions about a singular source that we find, but to try and find all possible records, whether online or in distant locations, to see whether we can get multiple sources for key information to validate dates, times, places, all of that. Source citations are really important, and unfortunately, this is one I didn't learn when I was first starting out because I didn't even know what that was. But it tells others coming behind you that are looking at your family tree, where did you find the information that you're stating is fact? And can I go back and actually look at it myself? So a source citation actually will give the reader of your genealogy, if you write it out in a book, but it can also give your family tree online validity because there's a source from where that record came, a point in time reference for how you found what you did. And there's always more every day. And then finally, we analyze what we found, looking critically into whether the records correlate or match a date or location about our ancestor. But then we also, in the next point, have to work with any conflicting information that comes up, whether that's dates or places, and we have to figure out whether or not one is more accurate than the other, and sorting through all of that can be a lot of work. And of course, then hopefully writing out the stories of our ancestors, compiling a book, consulting with the experts and archivists about their collections to see if there's still something we've missed. But when we finally write it down and we believe what the evidence is telling us, we state why we have concluded what we have and give a reasonably written, coherently written conclusion to why we believe Grandpa Joe's real name was this and where we finally believe he was born. So I'm simplifying this tremendously because I'm hoping to offer more that I'd like to be considered and what I hope would be a methodology beyond this, using science, psychology, quantum physics, and more. So let's keep going into that. So one of our roles as a genealogist is to be a bridge to that information. So, you know, like in this illustration, I feel many times that an ancestor is guiding me to information, but it's also information I'm sharing with my family and my online community through my family tree. But it's also using these skills, learning from educational work, you know, curriculums like institutes and genealogy society presentations to develop the tools and skills that refine what we can learn and know. But then also, out of our compassion and curiosity, we may develop characteristics like intuition or recognize when a coincidence is happening, or the synchronicity of a new resource, or even a television show that shows us more about something that we didn't know. There's certainly an aspect of what we would call readiness to when we're finding important information to hold on to, but staying open to the input, new resources and insights that can be derived from or guide us to even more information is our responsibility of telling the truth, finding the actual facts as much as we're able to confirm or deny what we think is true of our ancestors' lives. Some of these things, like intuition, coincidental happenings, synchronicity, and all of those words, some people will call a bit weird or magical, odd, and sometimes very fortunate happenings that may actually mean something. It's like our ancestors start standing behind us and coaching us towards something, giving us information that, yes, we could find other ways perhaps, and might take a long time, but if we follow that sort of nudging, it might get us closer sooner through a spark of inspiration, even a dream, propelling us to a new resource or a location or a part of the story that we wouldn't even have thought to consider. So it's really important that we listen. So why do we listen for this kind of content? Well, most of us are in the family tree business because we're curious. We're curious about our family stories, and we're longing to understand perhaps what brought our ancestors to where we're currently living, or why did they cross an ocean to come here? We want to make connections somehow with the people who came before us because of their struggles and the lives they lived, but then gathering evidence to confirm traditions and beliefs that have come down through the family. We have lots of reasons, those on the screen and many more I'm sure that you personally have, and it becomes more emotional than perhaps a physical search. We have to be careful not to let bias in, looking only for records that confirm what we think is true, but we also have to look at the the information that we would want to omit because it conflicts. That's part of our GPS, our genealogical system that we have to put in place so that we are confirming or denying certain pieces of information. But then there's always more. And this is where I want to encourage you to go now, beyond the GPS as we know it, into some new territory. So I'll talk in this next section, in this new territory, about how our body, our mind, and our spirit, or psychology, if you will, enters the work. We'll go through each of these three areas now a little bit in order to give you the broader territory that I've been exploring that has helped me with my research. So let's start with the mind. On the screen is a lot of information about some topics and areas that might be of interest to you. Please look at your handout if you've downloaded it. And for 9 pages of printing, I would encourage you just to keep it on your computer for now. But let's talk a little bit about each of these areas so you know what I'm trying to explain. In cognitive psychology, there are layers of research, insight, academic writings, and more that give us knowledge of ourselves and others. It gives us a perspective. Certainly, this is an area that we could use to deepen our own self-awareness and our own personality development. But here today, I want to offer the benefit of learning about family systems theory, or family dynamics theory, which looks at how families are influential and how we develop our personal philosophies, religion, spiritual tradition, how we approach the world, and a variety of factors. A key tool in this area is called a genogram. You can create a genogram that looks very much like a family tree, entering your family names in the boxes per usual, but then using symbols or colors to indicate a medical illness that maybe took someone's life, the locations that or countries that they lived in, the ethnicity of this person in the family, perhaps their religion or spiritual tradition, and you can use that to look for themes and trends in the family dynamics. What did they do? What did they die from? What may then have informed their family's developing history because they maybe died young and a young mother had to remarry quickly so that they'd have a roof over their head. It takes some deep thought and learning, but to know that certain aspects of when the family may have moved, along with when deaths may have occurred, might explain why a move happened. Or if an alcoholic ancestor died, did a spouse remarry quickly because they had mouths to feed? Noting faith traditions on a genogram, and especially creating one that includes siblings, can expose a change in religion that may have caused a break in the family and hence explains why there were no more family reunions. Can be a marvelous tool giving you these themes to move through your work. And then we get into an area of deeper cognitive psychology called predictive encoding or predictive coding. The definition is on the second page of your handout. This is the idea about how the mind works, and I'm offering it to you as a way to support our research. Luck theory is about the aspect of how we hold positive thoughts, be expansive and inclusive in our thinking, and take in as much as in our environment as possible. It helps us to feel lucky. And in that case, you can read the article from Ben Sherman in the O Magazine example that I provide, or the citation on page 6 in the handout, or get the entire book on page 6 from Richard Wiseman called The Luck Factor. It explains the research that's been done in 4 principles to help you feel lucky. Wouldn't it be nice to feel very lucky in our genealogy research? Some of you may be very familiar with the technique of problem solving overnight through the use of the mechanisms of the mind when we go to sleep. The technique is before you go to sleep, you think about the problem you're trying to solve. And in lots of cases, when we wake up in the morning, we have at least one solution to that problem. An alternative learning styles area is Howard Gardner's work that I'm referencing, and that also is in your handout on page 5. Howard Gardner developed a series of learning styles that a lot of people might have, being visual learners, auditory learners, kinesthetic learners, musical, interpersonal learner, intrapersonal learner, or a mathematical learner. Each of those has propensities in all of us in different percentages and different degrees. In the United States, the American educational system favors visual and auditory learning, but other forms of learning can give us data and information that otherwise we never would have had, and guides us to think about other alternatives to what we're seeing and feeling. And then finally, vision boards, or what's called in the crime field, in the police field, a victimology board. So for any of you that know Nathan Dylan Goldwyn's books, his character, Morton Farrier, who is a professional genealogist, uses this technique to help him solve the genealogy problem. It helps to show patterns, it helps to show themes. So that is also on your handout in the vision board area. I put a little bit of a definition, but this image actually shows you what it might look like. My brother-in-law is a former chief of police, and I talked to him about this concept that I had been working with off and on in my work life, trying to develop presentations for clients, trying to help a nonprofit get out of trouble, etc. And he told me that it was called in the police field victimology, which was putting up pictures or connections between why victims were chosen by a perpetrator and how they would find the perpetrator from the commonalities that existed with the particular victims. In Nathan's books, his character Morton Farrier uses it with his genealogy research for clients, and they'll sit it for long periods of time, maybe staring at the board until suddenly a bolt of insight hits him, and that takes him off on, another library or archive research trip, or maybe to a cemetery. Lots of people will use these kinds of boards and will link concepts or themes with strings or yarn, but it helps to develop your insight, your intuition, and also can elevate gaps in your research or key information that you need to get to help with a breakthrough. It's a marvelous technique that I've used for a number of years. And then finally, there's the stuff that gets a little bit, to some people's view, weird. So intuition and how that can come up and how you develop your intuition, how you might have dreams that could be from your ancestors, if that tends to be something that you think about. But then the synchronicity and the patterns of how synchronicity can show up. And again, on your handout, I've put some definitions for some of these. From my study of the 2 Psychic Roots books that Hank Jones put together, I found that there were a number of commonalities, such as research or mental exhaustion, and maybe even physical exhaustion from sitting in a chair for a long time in front of a computer, but then openness to looking around randomly, walking up and down aisles of bookshelves at a library, or a chance conversation with somebody, when you've gone out for dinner. Sometimes being misguided to a location or a placement of a book, and when you go to that shelf, you actually find a book somewhere near it that actually gives you the more correct information you needed. And then there's always the really unusual things like the nudges, the urges, the sense that you're being actually kind of pulled or pushed by an ancestor toward a specific outcome or, particular item like a book or a library source. And then there's an element of cognitive psychology that is deeper and can be harder, but it is the aspect of facing the hard truths of our genealogy and our ancestors' lives and honoring all parts of the story because it developed from those ancestors down through time to us and gives us the opportunity to recognize that we developed resilience and courage and strength that we can carry on and pass on to others in the next generation. I want to offer a thank you especially to Elizabeth Hodges at the Allen County Public Library, because she led me to articles about the intergenerational trauma that unfortunately is part of many, if not most of our families. And she gave me a couple of articles cited in the handout by Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart. And she happens to be a researcher of Indigenous ancestry. And Elizabeth guided me to these because we were having a discussion about this aspect of psychology where we learn from our ancestors, but then also what comes down to us is the trauma and stress of what those families lived through. In my Indigenous family, the brutality of the Indian boarding schools and the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls movement attest to all the different groups and communities across ethnicities, war zones, and geographies that help us through our genealogy work when we are open to the idea of learning from the negative as well as positive impacts to our ancestors. I hope that revealing what our ancestors endured sparks strongly to you learning about the resilience and adaptations that are reflected in all of our family trees. And then in the body section, there is all of the kinds of things that can be happening that will cause you to recognize that something else is going on. In a conversation I had with a DNA expert, I broached the subject of DNA as energy and a vibration. And I said, well, am I correct about that? And they answered, oh, yes. So I went on. So I continued, if that is true, then the feeling that I have in my body when I'm standing on a gravesite or at an ancestor's farm or near their house, could it be that my DNA is resonating to the energy of the land or that place? And they said, yes, it certainly could, especially considering quantum physics. We're just beginning to know more about the energy fields of DNA, cellular energy, and even how trees and plants and animals communicate. So it's not outside of rational science at all that you could feel a vibration from your ancestors. They live through your DNA. That was what they said. You could knock me over with a feather at that point. So there are plenty of examples from Psychic Roots, the books, and my own personal experiences and the experiences that others have shared with me of how someone maybe had given up looking. Maybe their brain felt like it had just stopped thinking, and they were walking out of a cemetery and literally tripped over the tombstone they'd been looking for. Or they were tired of cranking on the microfilm machine in the old days of cranking microfilm machines, and when they stopped to rest, it stopped on the record they needed. There are many new areas of research that are showing measurable scientific data that reflects the new physics of quantum physics, the effects of universal energy, the energy of cells, and even the circumference of energy from the heart of any living being. Quantum physics proposes that there is no time or space, but that everything is simultaneous, operating over vast distances with sound and energy pervading the universe. The repeated occurrence personally of a particular feeling in my body when standing at a gravesite or on a farm has turned into a tool that I use when I'm out on locations where ancestors may have lived, died, or worked. I could give you lots of examples. But in the field of quantum physics, the aspect of feedback loops and all of the ways that our behavior is controlled through a variety of energy tools is really important and applies in genealogy. While we don't have nearly enough time, and I'm just beginning to learn about some of this quantum physics, my husband, himself a physics major, has been helping me to explore this. So sound and energy pulses, electromagnetic energy, and research into cellular functions, so DNA and RNA and all of that, all point to, and this is a definition in your handout with sources on page 6 and 7, the field of epigenetics. Epigenetics is a field that helps to quantify all of this in ways that we can understand about how there is a control mechanism in place above genetics so that genes per se are not the only code in operation, that cell operations and the feedback loop between living beings and their environment is far more important than we ever would have thought. Everything is interconnected, fluid, and impacts everything else. So finding ways to incorporate this into your research through the quantum physics principles, if there's no space or no time, and it's across broad geographies, well, why would it not be possible for you to be in touch with your ancestors? Why would it not be possible for you to feel something different in your body when your DNA vibrates with the environment in which you inherited that DNA from your ancestors? Of course, it gets pretty out there, and a lot of people, including me, don't fully understand it, but I've given you some ideas of books to read that are kind of at a beginner level, if you will, because this is kind of a new area. But part of what this also, quantum physics also may demonstrate is the aspect of the subject of communication with our ancestors, even life beyond death. And in physics, there is a basic theorem that energy is never created nor destroyed. So why couldn't they live beyond death? Why couldn't there be miracles? Why couldn't they communicate with us? Please look at page 7 of the handout for some of these quantum physics references, because they might be fertile ground for you to look in, to dig into, that maybe include some tools or activities that you could incorporate in an overall methodology beyond the GPS. And then also there's the aspect of every protein in our body has a complement to something in the environment that activates it. So theoretically, something in the environment is available for all of the disease problems that we have in the world, and that there's something in the environment that could help to heal it. I'm also referencing cellular research that shows the different regulatory mechanisms in cellular functions. Some of you might really know, either intimately or in your family, about those who received organs of donors So in that second paragraph on the screen, I'm talking about the self-receptors or the human leukocytic antigens that determine whether or not somebody can be operated on to receive a kidney from a donor. These particular receptors actually tell our immune system how to respond and are unique in forming identity. So the identity of each of us lives at a cellular level. So do our cells, our DNA, remember or manifest aspects of our ancestral environments? Does our body, our DNA, or our mind remember that? Yeah, okay, it sort of gets a little weird, I understand, but this is actual science that's being tested and is showing some positive results that not only the medical world could use, but those of us that are in the genealogy field. So now let me show you briefly a little bit of what you might do with some of what I've shared. So this is a mind map. Many of you are probably familiar with these and probably more elaborate ones. But what I'm trying to encourage you to do is think about a broader methodology of family research. So I'm offering you my current mind map because I've been looking for my ancestor, Robert Elliott, for about 50 years. I've been looking for his birthplace and how he came to be in French Catholic Quebec in the 1780s as a Scottish Protestant, and then married a French Acadian Catholic woman who had escaped the horrors of the violent deportation of the French Acadians from Nova Scotia, beginning in 1755. I've had some marvelous progress in finding information about his life from about 1787, which was his first appearance in a record, to his death in 1810. But now with what I've been learning, I'm stepping up my focused research using this mind map by creating a vision board with elements and a timeline of what I know about him. I'm making a more diligent effort at looking for men in the Elliott surname line that may have tested with Y DNA. I'm using my intuition and dreams and synchronicity when I go on a trip this fall to Quebec, to the location where he lived and where his grave is. I already know that his tombstone won't be there, but I'm thinking that just standing in that cemetery might be able to help. And I'm digging into outreach to experts in Quebec and maybe another trip to the archives at some point to seek records that I didn't know about. But I did start looking way back in the pre-computer era, so I probably have some new things to look at. So what would you include if you were to create this broader pathway, this broader methodology to create a mind map for your research? What might it include? So it's now your turn. What would you do? What might you use in this mind map or a methodology, using first the GPS, going through DNA, and although you could say that DNA certainly is part of GPS, but then what? So your handout's got a lot of resources for you that perhaps you hadn't learned about before, and some of these tools might be new to you. So dig into some of the information that's in that handout, because you might be able to find something that clicks in your mind that helps you further along. So with all that we have potentially available to us, as well as the most powerful thing in our little hand, our cell phone, if it's a smartphone, and all of the research we can even do from there while we're on the road, you can use the tools of modern science, psychology, quantum physics, and well beyond that, into the religious or spiritual worlds that we and our ancestors have dealt with. And also this concept of a mind map or a vision board, all of that, to help you to draw on things that might give you nudges, clue you to new resources, develop some aspects of your own skills, your own strengths that you could draw on. But now, as we draw to a close, I really want you to guide me about this presentation. So I'm really hoping that you use the link that Kate is sharing in the chat so that you can give me feedback about what was helpful here in the presentation, what you'd like more of, less of, etc., what you might want me to change or update for an hour-long presentation. I'd also want to offer this presentation in a longer format with hands-on activities and discussion. If you have some thought about that, I'd like to hear it. And then finally, I really, really, really encourage you to think about creating your own methodology that's broader and bigger and encompassing all of the stuff that's available to us in the modern world, so that we might be able to hear more from each other about what's available and what we might be able to use learning from each other. So please give me feedback, make me comments, write me an email, indicate that you maybe want to talk to me on the phone, whatever works for you. But I really, really want to hear from you. Thank you so much. My email is on the handout. And if you email me with a desire to even talk by phone or Zoom, we could do that. But I want to go through and get as much as I can in writing first, so I understand what kind of thought process you all are having and what might be most helpful to you. So with that, Kate, I think I'm ready for seeing if there's anybody that has questions.
Good. Thank you so much for your presentation. And we do have a few questions for you. So let's see. The first one, somebody's asking, what did you use for your images?
So I
They
use
enjoyed your images. Yeah.
Chat GPT 4.0. And you have to learn how to write the query to ChatGPT. That's another whole area of study. So if you want information about, who's doing those kind of programs. So Stephen Little from the National Genealogical Society, Mark Thompson, there's a whole variety of people doing workshops about how to use artificial intelligence. There are other models. I'm just getting used to ChatGPT at this point, but that's how I created all my images.
Sounds good. Thank you. We also have a couple questions about who to start with. How do you decide who you would like to start with?
Who you would like to start with in your ancestor group? Is that what I'm
Yes.
hearing? Okay.
Hmm.
Well, so generally what I've done is, certainly if you've developed your family tree and you're really working hard on a particular line. So let's just say you're working on your surname line and you're trying to see how far back you can get it. Well, then staying focused on that father's line to get back how far back can I get our surname? When did our family start, using it first? Where were they living in the world? Um, as you get broader in your family tree, obviously you get pretty quickly to thousands of people. So I would encourage you to think about, well, what is your goal? If you're wanting the story of, well, why is our family Catholic? Or where did this particular holiday remembrance come from? Like, we always go to church on on Christmas Eve. Why do we do that? Where did that come from? So there's a variety of ways that you can narrow down the ancestors to get some of the aspects of the stories. And then, of course, DNA helps you, because if you get those DNA tests done and you get it back and you're like, Swedish, where the heck did that come from? Well, now you're off on another tangent. So you have to pick what your goal is for what you want to learn to narrow it down. Because if you try and study all thousands of them, millions of them, when you get back far enough, you're going to make yourself crazy. Stick with one line or one story or one ancestor and flesh them out with everything you can possibly find. That'll lead to the next story, believe me.
Thank you. Our next question is, how do you kind of differentiate between a gut feeling and a bias when you're following leads?
Well, they do feel different in my body. So honestly, I've worked at this for a really, really long time. So I can tell when I'm trying to make something like a square box fit into a round hole. I recognize when I'm not being honest with myself and I'm trying to make something fit. So that's a bias. But then, the real intuitions tend to come in, I would say sort of lightning bolt moments, where it's just sort of a flash of inspiration. It's a flash of something that I hadn't thought about. It just comes up out of nowhere. Whereas the bias part, I've learned enough to recognize, oh, that's not honest, Judy. You're trying to fit a square box in a round hole. You need to like pay attention to not messing with that. So yeah, there is a different feeling, but you have to kind of watch yourself. So a lot of self-observation is really important.
Thank you. So it looks like we have one more question. Before we get to that, I just wanted to mention for anybody that would like a copy of the chat, or if you have additional questions that pop up afterwards, please send us an email at genealogy@acpl.info. Actually, two more. So one is, how do you cite the quantum methods in your research?
So the quantum methods that I've been developing, I will on my family tree, there is in most programs, either computer-based programs or the online programs, there's some kind of note section. So when I am working towards some kind of belief that I'm working in the area of quantum physics, I'll make a note to myself. So it's not seen by anybody else looking at my family tree. It's a private note to me that that's where that line was going. That's where my thought was happening. And I'll make a note to myself about that. I have not yet, like I said, I'm still learning all this quantum stuff, but I have not yet written formalized citations yet for things. I'm still finding articles and books about quantum physics. And there's always journal articles that, are prolific on the internet. So as I find things, I'll start writing formal citations, but I honestly can tell you I haven't gotten there yet.
Thank you. So combining a couple of questions, do you recommend physical vision boards, digital ones? Have you had more success with either type?
There is a difference. So I recommend the physical one that you can have in your room, one you can have if you have a home office. Vision boards work best, and I wrote a little bit about that in the handout. They work best if you see them at the last thing in the evening and the first thing in the morning for 30 days, and then you can put them away. So having it on your computer, it's not recommended just before you go to bed to be into an electronic digital system because it won't help you sleep. But having it on a poster board is the principle of predictive encoding, so that you're seeing it and it's entering your mind unobstructed. And then when you go to sleep, you're actually kind of working through what the patterns might be. And then when you see it first thing in the morning, it can trigger any kind of responses your brain has developed. So I highly recommend the physical vision board. And in those instructions, it also indicates that the brain works best with images. So the fewer words you put on a vision board, the better. So even in the technique like that, Morton Ferrier, the character in Dylan's books, or in Nathan's books, even in that, I would say those bulletin boards, like I would put broad-based, like big words, or a picture of a cemetery versus the actual cemetery record. I would do that to kind of find the patterns. But I recommend visual, physical boards as opposed to digital ones.
These are all really helpful tips. Thank you.
I hope so.
And I'll just stick our email there in the chat again, genealogy@acpl.info, if you have any questions or would like a copy of the chat. So thank you again, Judy, so much for presenting and sharing all that great information with us. And thank you to everybody for attending. So
thank you to everybody who came, and please, feedback form, please fill it out and get it to me. I am looking so forward to hearing what you thought.
thank you again, and I hope everybody has a good day.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Kate. Bye, everyone.